Hello everybody, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Welcome back to my channel. Before we get started, I just want to apologize for probably the raspy sound of my voice because I've been getting a little stuffed up lately and I'm just sort of recovering from being sick over the winter season, so bear with me. However, I really wanted to talk about this topic because this is probably one of the biggest topics that many people were confused over, and I think that it would be very good to sort of have a refresher or some sort of review about this topic. And that topic is phase diagrams and multi-phase flow. So, phase diagrams is very important because it sort of describes our reservoir, and once we have a description of our reservoir, that's sort of the first step towards sort of building plans about how to take out that reservoir fluid, take out that hydrocarbons. And sort of the idea of this is to bring about a understanding of phase diagrams and how phase diagrams are classifying reservoirs. We Our goal is also to learn about the different phases that hydrocarbons experience from the reservoir to the surface. Very similar to how a water droplet, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but you know how the water cycle, where you learn how in school you learn how water travels from, let's say, your sink to evaporation and condensation, stuff like that. I want to sort of take that concept and apply it to a hydrocarbon or a oil, basically. And finally, I want to sort of touch basis on the ecosystem of movable oil. I kind of want to give a introduction of an overview of how the reservoir sort of works in terms of from production, on a production standpoint, from the reservoir to the surface. And I hope that all of this makes sense and you can sort of apply this to your understanding of petroleum engineering concepts. So, first, let's learn some terminology. The main topic that we're going to talk about here is oil reservoirs, and we will talk about some gas reservoirs. However, I want to focus today's video on oil reservoirs. And the key thing to really understand from this slide is the concepts between undersaturated oil reservoirs and saturated reservoirs. Undersaturated reservoirs are reservoirs where the initial reservoir pressure is greater than the bubble point pressure of the reservoir fluid. I'll say that again. Undersaturated reservoirs is when the initial pressure is greater than the bubble point pressure. And saturated is the opposite. Saturated reservoirs is when the initial reservoir pressure is equal to or below the bubble point. And I know I put gas cap reservoir out there. However, gas cap reservoir is sort of a different story. Gas cap reservoirs, if the initial reservoir pressure is below the bubble point. Gas cap reservoirs is sort of a feature of the reservoir itself, and it's also used as a way to describe. It's basically another way to describe an oil reservoir. We'll talk about that in a different video, or maybe we'll talk about it later in this one. Who knows? Going back. So, sorry. one thing that you need to know is that phase diagrams define the reservoir through pressure and temperature. And in this diagram, there's other points that you need to consider. There is a critical point, which it is the maximum point of pressure and temperature for the fluid to change. In a reservoir, you will always have either a gas or a liquid. And once you reach below bubble point, you go into this phase envelope, which is here known as the two-phase region. The two-phase region is when you are having both gas and liquid, and they both exist in your system now. Same thing could be said about a single-phase curve where you have just one phase, which is gas. I'll show you a diagram soon. No need to worry about that. But because there are two phases, we have two curves, which is the bubble point curve and the dew point curve. The bubble point curve is a line that basically separates the liquid from a gas in terms of liquid turning into gas. Now, try to stay with me on this, but the dew point curve is sort of the opposite, because if you cross the dew point curve, you have gas turning into liquid. And I sort of have a diagram in mind that I will show you shortly. But these phase diagrams determine classifications of the type of reservoir fluid you are dealing with. There's black oil, volatile oil, dry gas, wet gas, and condensate. And mainly for this video, we're going to focus on oil reservoirs, but I want to talk about the other three briefly because there is some confusion onto how sort of, especially with wet gas and condensate, how the phase diagrams work. So let's start with black oil, because black oil you can see here on this diagram. But first, let me go over the diagram real quick. I know it's aptly labeled by the person who made it, but you see from A to C, you have the bubble point line, which leads to the liquid phase, and you have the dew point curve, which leads into the gas phase. The critical point is sort of that one point where you, which is pretty much the max pressure and temperature you can have, and this line, can I mark it with my cursor? No, I can't. Let me exit out of this. Nope. No, you can't. Well, that really sucks. But this, I lost you. Okay, there you go. This line right here that says pressure path in reservoir basically talks about the ecosystem of the reservoir. So black oil, just to give you a heads up, black oil can be described as gas oil ratios from 200 to 700 standard cubic feet per stock tank barrel. They are around 15 to 40 degrees API for specific gravity, and they're usually brown to a dark green in color. And you can see here that for black oil, you can see that the initial pressure is below the, I mean, no, not below, is above the bubble point, meaning that it is an undersaturated reservoir at the beginning. However, as the oil travels through from 1 to E, the pressure decreases, and then you hit the bubble point, and then from E to F, pressure decreases even more, and now you have a system, an ecosystem, where you have both liquid and gas. Seems enough. Now, let's talk about volatile oil. And volatile oils, very similar to black oil. It is classified by either high shrinkage or low shrinkage. And those are dependent on another set of factors that we're not going to touch upon today. But lower high shrinkage volatile oil depends on the oil's specific gravity and the gas oil ratios. And I'm pretty sure you can determine low or high shrinkage. But if you look at the diagram, what I find pretty interesting is that you notice that volatile oil has not only a greater curve, but let's go back to black oil. The critical point has a higher pressure, and I want to say, yeah, has a higher pressure, and the initial conditions are closer to the critical point. That's pretty much how you can remember volatile oil, because it's more, I like to think it's more lively. It wants to be critical. That's volatile oil for a volatile oil reservoir. Now let's talk about dry gas. And dry gas is very simple in the idea that dry gas reservoirs always keep the same phase. You will always have a gas in the reservoir, and you will always have a gas in the separator at the surface. Wet gas is the opposite. In wet gas, you have you start out with a pure gas in the reservoir, and as the hydrocarbons come to the surface, it begins to cross the dew point, and now it will release both gas and liquid. And at the surface conditions, you will have both gas and liquid. Now, condensate is the last category I wanted to talk about today, but that's sort of a confusing topic by itself, especially since I just talked about wet gas. So condensate gas reservoirs is sort of a phenomenon almost, where you have a reservoir where the temperature and the initial temperature of the reservoir is sort of between the cricondotherm and the critical point. We know that the critical point is sort of the highest pressure at the highest temperature, and vice versa. However, the cricondotherm is the highest temperature at that the reservoir can, I mean, not the reservoir, that the cricondotherm is sort of the highest temperature in the reservoir. And now picture wise, think of it like this. So you see this this curve right there, where it's sort of swooshes between the critical point and the cricondotherm? Well, in condensate, you sort of form a new kind of liquid where you cross the dew point, you start dropping liquid, but then you also, as you drop pressure, but you also sort of release condensate. Like, it's not like wet gas, where in wet gas you had just liquid and gas. Condensate is, I'm trying to think of the best words to describe this. Maybe some of you can help me out. But condensate is when you reach the first dew point curve, and then you sort of reach the second dew point curve, and you sort of yield a interesting liquid in response. Condensate, like I said, temperatures between the critical point and the cricondotherm. The gas-oil ratio is between 8,000 to 70,000. However, that varies due to the amount of liquid that is being dropped out. And instead of like this black colored liquid that you saw from oil reservoirs, you now have a water white, sort of slightly colored stock tank liquid. And that's why we sort of classify condensate as its own, and that reaches beyond this video. So with all of that in mind, I want to take a look at a reservoir's ecosystem really quickly. So let's pull up let's pull up this page that I brought up on OneNote. So let's consider a reservoir for a second. So that was really bad. I apologize, because I'm still trying to learn all of this. So let's take this into consideration. So let me scroll down a little bit. Let's erase this for now. Let's redo that, because I want more space for there you go. Yes, awesome. So this right over here is the surface, and let's just say this over here is our reservoir. Now we have, I don't know, let's say separator is up here, and let's say that oil is flowing from the reservoir into this area over here, which is known as the wellbore. Now, so what did we talk about today? We talked about, we talked about oil reservoirs, undersaturated, saturated reservoirs. We talked about black oil. We talked about volatile oil. We talked about dry gas. Dry gas. We talked about wet gas. And then we talked about condensate. So when we have oil from here to here, oops, yeah. So when we have oil from here to here, think of it like a change in pressure. So we have a high pressure going to a lower pressure. Okay. So let's call this 1. Let's call this 2. Let's call this 3. And let's call this 4. Now, let's start with assuming we're dealing with a black oil reservoir. Okay. So at phase 1, our black oil is going to number 2 in a drop of pressure. This is very similar to what we saw here. And let me draw the black oil diagram in case any of you need a sort of a backup. So, gosh. Nope. How do I, let's say, let's do that. Cool. Why does it want me to, it keeps right clicking every time I just want to shade it. Whatever. Anyways, so let's see. This is our come on, man. R1. This is, oops. You know what? I'm going to start over on this drawing because that was awful. This is what I get for doing everything live. Okay. So, there you go. So this, if you remember, is the critical point. So that's a critical point. This is pressure. This is temperature. And this line here is our reservoir at number 1. And this is our, let's say, number 4. And so on, so forth. So somewhere in this bubble point line, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. I don't think you can, but somewhere along this curve, we reach from 1 to 3. Because usually in experiences from the reservoir to the wellbore, there's no change in pressure because you are moving laterally in a vertical reservoir. So at part 3, what happens is that the liquid in the black oil reservoir crosses the bubble point line and reaches this area here, which can be considered as the two-phase area. Now, in this two-phase area, which is number 3 over here, we have oil. We have we have liquid. We can't say oil. We have liquid, and we have gas. And the reason why I can't say that we have oil is because we can't confirm nor deny that there is a possibility that there is water in the reservoir. Don't worry about that. Just stick with me for now. But so we have liquid. I'll just extend this line, I guess. We have liquid, we have gas in number 3. And then the pressure decreases until at number 4, when we're already here at the separator, we have both a liquid and a gas. Simple enough. Now, volatile oil is the same. Volatile oil is the same concept. Now, remember what we said before? Volatile oil is just when the reservoir conditions is just closer to the critical point. So there's not really much changes visually in the ecosystem of the reservoir. Now, I want to sort of quickly, considering this video is already 27 minutes, that of a gas reservoir. So over here in a gas reservoir, let me see if I can make that curve and the critical point. No. And the critical point is right here. Let's call this, I don't know, PC, comma, TC. That's pressure, that's temperature. And we have all of these dashed lines that sort of make up our two-phase system. So now in a dry gas system, our reservoir conditions are going to be all the way over here. We have this is going to be our number 1, and this is going to be our number 4. Notice how we never touch this dew point curve. This dew point curve over here. Now, because of that, since we never cross that, our fluid will always remain as a gas. Our fluid in dry gas is single phase, so we will never have any other liquids in this reservoir, and it'll be the same all the way up through, including the separator. Wet gas. Now you see here, I'll use, I don't know, blue. Around number 3 in the pipe, where you actually go vertically from the reservoir to the surface, you begin to see this deviation. Let's say this dotted line is the deviation until here, where this is 4. This point over here is where we cross into the dew point, and now we have a gas forming a liquid in the pipe, and now we will have both liquid and gas at the surface. So now lastly, let me scroll down even more if this will let me. But Now, when we have a condensate reservoir, you remember these diagrams being something like, okay, this is the cricondotherm, this is T cry, and then if this is the, let me erase that. Nope. Come on, can I get that? Nope. I guess I have to erase the whole thing. So, you know what? Let's start over. Okay. Now we know this right here is the cricondotherm. And let's say this is the critical point, right? Your reservoir, I'll mark it here in red, is here. And now you have this system of, now you have this system where you cross the dew point, but you're crossing the dew point curve twice, and now you have this phenomenon where you're producing condensate. So overall, that is the ecosystem of a reservoir. This is a very important concept, especially because now you're getting into the nitty gritty of, okay, what kind of reservoir are we dealing with? How are we going to get it out of the ground? Are we dealing with two phases? Are we dealing with one phases? Because these are sort of the concepts that, especially reservoir engineers, will always sort of ask. Not sort of, they will ask, because, like I said, engineering is about finding the right tools for the right job and being able to identify and classify the ecosystem, and having an idea of what to expect is extremely important in this. So that's going to be the end of this video. I know it's a little bit long. I think this format sort of lets me, try to talk more in depth about topics, but I still want to keep it relatively short. So, anyways, thank you for watching. I will try to sort of do this again and fix my flaws, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Ask me in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.